From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we can all now go back to not pretending we care about soccer. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radio. So good to have you with us tonight. And as we convene this evening, the Spaniards have just defeated their former Argentine colonial subjects in a World Cup final played in a New Jersey, choking under the fumes of Canadian wildfires. How international is that? Before an audience consisting of most of the human race and several billion of whom will shortly become qualified international referees. And in true soccer fashion, no goals were scored until 105 minutes into the match, and not a single one of those minutes went by without at least one whiny douchebag rolling around on the ground pretending to be injured, because nothing says I'm a big, tough professional athlete like clutching your knee in melodramatic theatrical agony as a result of a guy grazing your shoe with his shoe. But notwithstanding all of that, the spectacle of the event is undeniably enormous. 48 national teams, 3 host countries, cavernous stadiums, global television coverage, and enough corporate sponsorship to ensure that even the match ball probably has an official banking partner. And it provides us with a convenient doorway into a supersized edition of This Week in History. How supersized is it, you ask? Well, 3 entries per day instead of the customary one. It's like This Week in History took a handful of little blue pills and it is ready to party. And you, the viewer, will spend the next day and a half with an ice pack on your nether regions. As it happens, the very first edition of the World Cup began during the week that we have just completed, in circumstances that were considerably more modest, considerably less organized, and, in one important respect, considerably more successful for the United States. Over the next 7 calendar dates, we will encounter revolutions, religious schisms, disputed crowns, catastrophic wars, atomic bombs, spaceships, theme parks, computer chips, perfect gymnastics scores, and competitive bicycle riding conducted under conditions that today would violate several international treaties and possibly numerous criminal statutes. There is no one single theme tying all of it together beyond the customary reminder that history refuses to remain in one genre. On one page of the calendar, a city burns. On the next, somebody takes the first photograph of another planet. And somewhere between the two, a committee of European diplomats, not for the last time, confidently asserts that it has solved the Balkan problem. So, with all necessary apologies to chronology, geography, and the surviving descendants of Otto von Bismarck, let us begin the proceedings on the 13th of July, 1863, when the New York City draft riots begin. On Monday, the 13th of July, 1863, barely a week after the Battle of Gettysburg, New York City responded to the preservation of the Union by attempting to destroy a substantial portion of itself. The proximate cause was the new federal military draft, the first of its kind in American history. The law contained a provision allowing a drafted man to avoid service by paying $300 or by hiring a substitute. Now, $300 was a fairly immense sum of money in those days to your ordinary working man, which meant that the government had devised a marvelously efficient system under which the poor could enjoy both compulsory military service and the knowledge that wealthier men were not enjoying it with them. When officials resumed drawing names at a draft office on 3rd Avenue, a crowd attacked the building and promptly set it ablaze. What began as resistance to conscription rapidly became something altogether darker and more appalling. Black New Yorkers were beaten and murdered. Homes and businesses were destroyed. A mob burned down the colored orphan asylum on 5th Avenue. Although the children and the staff were able to escape, the violence continued for 4 days, and order was finally restored, partly by federal troops who were hurried into the city after they'd just finished fighting the Battle of Gettysburg. The draft riots are sometimes described as an explosion of class anger, which they most certainly were. But class anger alone does not explain why so much of that anger was deliberately redirected toward people who had neither written the draft law nor possessed $300. It was one of the ugliest episodes of the Civil War that took place away from the battlefield, a rebellion against an unequal law that became a racial pogrom in a Union city while the Union was fighting a war that had increasingly become a war against slavery. 13 July 1878, the Treaty of Berlin. Exactly 15 years later, on Saturday, the 13th of July 1878, the representatives of Europe's great powers signed the Treaty of Berlin. Its purpose was to settle the latest crisis in the Balkans, a phrase that has appeared so many times in history that it ought to be followed automatically by ominous music. Russia had defeated the Ottoman Empire and imposed the Treaty of San Stefano, creating an enormous autonomous Bulgaria that would have placed much of the Balkans within Russia's political orbit. Britain and Austria-Hungary regarded this as fairly intolerable, not because they objected to powerful empires rearranging smaller nations, naturally, but because on this occasion it was somebody else's powerful empire that was doing the rearranging. The German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck therefore summoned a Congress in Berlin and offered his services as what he called an honest broker. The resulting treaty recognized the independence of Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania. It drastically reduced Bulgaria, created the autonomous province of Eastern Rumelia, returned Macedonia to Ottoman control, and permitted Austria-Hungary to occupy and administer Bosnia and Herzegovina. Britain, meanwhile, had secured Cyprus through a separate agreement with the Ottomans before the Congress had begun. The treaty prevented an immediate European war, which was not nothing. It also left nearly every interested nation dissatisfied, humiliated, or convinced that it had somehow been cheated. Russia resented Germany. Bulgarians resented the partition of Bulgaria. Serbs coveted Bosnia. Austria acquired responsibility for Bosnia without acquiring any sensible means of making its inhabitants pleased about the arrangement. Europe congratulated itself upon restoring the balance of power. 36 years later, the heir to the Austrian throne was murdered in Bosnia by a Bosnian Serb, and everybody discovered that the problem had apparently required a bit of additional work. 13 July 1930, the first World Cup begins. On Sunday, the 13th of July 1930, the first FIFA World Cup began in Montevideo, Uruguay. This brings us neatly back to the match that was played earlier today, although almost nothing about the original tournament resembled the modern planetary extravaganza that we know today. There were only 13 teams. No qualifying competition had been held. Every entrant came by invitation, and only 4 European countries accepted, largely because reaching Uruguay required an expensive transatlantic voyage lasting approximately 2 weeks at the shortest. The Romanian team reportedly traveled aboard a ship personally arranged by King Carol II, which is the sort of direct royal involvement that FIFA has since replaced with hospitality packages. 2 matches kicked off simultaneously. France defeated Mexico 4-1, while the United States defeated Belgium 3-0, or 3-0 if we're holding to formality. The Frenchman Lucien Laurent scored the first goal in World Cup history. The Americans, meanwhile, advanced to the semifinals, which remains our best ever performance, and which occurred before most Americans had been formally notified that soccer exists. Uruguay went on to win the tournament, defeating Argentina in the final before a fiercely partisan home crowd. And so the World Cup began not with 48 teams, billion-dollar broadcasting contracts, and an extended halftime spectacular, but with 13 invited nations, several ocean liners, and 2 simultaneous matches in Montevideo. 96 years later, Spain and Argentina contested the championship in New Jersey today, and the scale has altered somewhat, but the basic arrangement remains unchanged. 22 men pursue a ball for 90 minutes, after which entire nations spend the next 4 years explaining that the referee was bribed. 14 July 1789, the storming of the Bastille. On Tuesday, the 14th of July 1789, the people of Paris stormed the Bastille, thereby beginning the French national tradition of celebrating political change with masonry damage. The Bastille was a medieval fortress that had become a royal prison and a symbol of arbitrary authority. By 1789, however, it was not exactly operating at peak capacity. The revolutionaries who captured it liberated 7 prisoners, 4 forgers, 2 men suffering from mental illness, and 1 aristocrat imprisoned at the request of his own family. This was not quite the subterranean army of political martyrs suggested by later revolutionary artwork, but freeing prisoners was not the crowd's main practical objective that day. Paris was in turmoil. The king had dismissed the popular finance minister Jacques Necker. Royal troops had gathered around the capital. The population had already seized thousands of muskets from the Hotel des Invalides, but those muskets required gunpowder, and the Bastille contained a considerable supply. After hours of fighting and confused negotiation, Governor Bernard René Delaunay surrendered the fortress. He was then promptly killed, his head placed upon a pike, and the revolution commenced its long campaign to persuade future generations that every administrative transition requires a severed head in a public procession. Militarily, the capture of the Bastille was a relatively small affair. Politically, it was colossal. It demonstrated that royal authority in Paris could be defeated by popular force, and news of its fall helped to trigger uprisings throughout France. The Bastille itself was soon dismantled, but as symbols go, it proved considerably more durable after demolition than it ever had while it was standing. 14 July 1916, the Battle of Byzantine Ridge. On Friday, the 14th of July 1916, 2 weeks after the disastrous opening of the Battle of the Somme, the British Fourth Army attacked the German defenses along Byzantine Ridge. It is one of the more interesting deep cuts of the First World War because, unlike the stereotypical Somme attack, it initially succeeded. The assault was carefully prepared. Rather than announcing the attack with a week-long bombardment audible in neighboring counties, the British concentrated their artillery fire into a shorter, more intense preparation. Infantry moved forward under cover of darkness and assembled in no man's land, dangerously close to the German lines. They attacked at dawn and achieved genuine surprise. British troops captured Byzantine-le-Grand, Byzantine-le-Petit, and much of Longueval, breaking into the German second defensive position and opening a possible route toward High Wood. For several hours, an opportunity existed to exploit the breach. Then came the traditional second phase of a successful British offensive: delay, confusion, and the gradual transformation of opportunity into another battle. Cavalry, which amazingly still existed at this late date, was sent forward far too late and in insufficient strength. High Wood was not immediately secured. The fighting spread into Delville Wood, which became the scene of a prolonged and exceptionally vicious struggle. Byzantine Ridge matters because it demonstrates that the British Army was capable of learning. Better artillery concentration, night assembly, and surprise produced results that had been absent back on the 1st of July. Unfortunately, armies generally learn only one lesson at a time, while battlefields are permitted to ask several questions simultaneously. The British had discovered how to break through the German line. They had not yet discovered what to do during the brief period after the line had been broken. 14 July 1965, Mariner 4 reaches Mars. On Wednesday, the 14th of July 1965, the American spacecraft Mariner 4 flew past Mars and gave humanity its first close-range view of another planet. And it's difficult to appreciate how mysterious Mars still was up until 61 years ago. Astronomers had mapped light and dark regions, polar caps, and seasonal changes, and that was about it. The supposed canals observed by Percival Lowell in the 19th century had inspired decades of speculation about vegetation, irrigation works, and intelligent inhabitants. By 1965, advanced Martian civilization was no longer a respectable scientific expectation, but nobody had yet dispatched a camera close enough to prove what sort of world was actually there. Mariner 4 passed roughly 6,000 miles above the surface and recorded 21 complete images. The data arrived so slowly that impatient engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory printed numerical values onto strips of paper and colored them by hand, producing a rough picture before the official computer processing was finished. What appeared was not a world of canals, cities, or lush seasonal vegetation. It was a cold, bleak, cratered landscape beneath an atmosphere that was far thinner than expected. The photographs covered only a small portion of Mars and gave an overly lunar first impression of how a planet we now know contains enormous volcanoes, canyons, and evidence of ancient flowing water. But in that moment, an entire imaginary civilization disappeared. For centuries, Mars had been a screen onto which human beings projected their hopes, their anxieties, and their fear of foreign invasions. Mariner 4 replaced the projection with 21 grainy photographs. They were crude, they were incomplete, but they were also revolutionary. Humanity had finally gone close enough to look at Mars in the face, and Mars, with characteristic planetary discourtesy, appeared not to have dressed for the occasion. 15 July 1099, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem. On Friday, the 15th of July 1099, the armies of the First Crusade achieved their main strategic objective by capturing the city of Jerusalem. The Crusaders had departed Western Europe nearly 3 years earlier, answering Pope Urban II's call to aid Eastern Christians and recover the Holy Land. That journey had carried them through starvation, disease, siege warfare, political intrigue, and the occasional discovery that their supposed Byzantine allies did not necessarily want enormous bands of heavily armed Franks wandering unsupervised through their empire. By June 1099, the surviving Crusaders had reached Jerusalem, which was then controlled by the Fatimid dynasty of Egypt. They lacked adequate food, water, and siege equipment, but obtained timber and constructed 2 great siege towers. On the morning of 15 July, the tower commanded by Godfrey of Bouillon reached the northern wall. Crusaders crossed onto the defenses, opened a gate, and then poured into the city. What followed was a massacre. Muslim inhabitants were killed in large numbers. Jewish residents who had sought refuge in a synagogue were burned inside of it. And contemporary Christian chroniclers described the bloodshed with evident pride rather than embarrassment. The First Crusade had accomplished the goal that later crusades would repeatedly fail to duplicate. Jerusalem became the center of a new Latin Christian kingdom, with Godfrey ruling under the carefully modest title of Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. Apparently, becoming a king in the city where Christ had worn his crown of thorns seemed a bit too presumptuous. Conquering the city and slaughtering much of its population presented fewer theological difficulties. The Crusader states would survive in various forms for nearly 2 centuries, but the capture of Jerusalem ensured that 15 July 1099 would remain one of the most consequential and bloodiest dates in the history of relations among Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. 15 July 1799, the Rosetta Stone is discovered. Exactly 700 years later, on Monday, the 15th of July 1799, another European army in the Eastern Mediterranean made a rather more constructive contribution to history. French soldiers serving in Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian expedition were strengthening a fort near the town of Rashid, known to Europeans as Rosetta. While dismantling an old wall, they uncovered a broken slab of dark stone covered with 3 different forms of writing. The discovery is generally credited to the officer Pierre-François Bouchard, who possessed the uncommon military instinct to recognize that an unusual rock might be more valuable before somebody incorporated it into another wall. The inscription was a decree issued in 196 BC during the reign of Ptolemy V. The same text appeared in Egyptian hieroglyphs, the everyday Egyptian script called Demotic, and in ancient Greek. Scholars could read the Greek. Hieroglyphs, however, had been a dead language for more than 1,000 years by that point, during which time Egypt's monuments had become enormous illustrated books with no surviving readership. The Rosetta Stone provided the essential key. Thomas Young made important early breakthroughs, and in 1822, Jean-François Champollion demonstrated that hieroglyphs were not merely symbolic pictures, but they incorporated phonetic sounds. The written civilization of ancient Egypt began to speak again. The French discovered the stone, but after Napoleon's Egyptian expedition collapsed, the British acquired it under the terms of the French surrender. It has resided in the British Museum since 1802 because no history of archaeology is complete until the British arrive during the final paragraph and carry the archaeology home with them. Thus, exactly 7 centuries after Western soldiers captured one of the ancient world's holiest cities, other Western soldiers accidentally recovered the dictionary required to read one of its greatest civilizations. 15 July 1916, William Boeing founds an aircraft company. On Saturday, the 15th of July 1916, William Boeing incorporated the Pacific Aero Products Company in Seattle, Washington. Boeing was a wealthy timber businessman who had become fascinated by aviation after having attended an air show in California. Like many early aviation enthusiasts, he took one look at a machine constructed largely from wood, wire, and optimism and concluded that it represented the future of transportation. Boeing learned to fly and purchased an airplane, but became frustrated by the difficulty of obtaining replacement parts. He reportedly decided that he could build a better airplane himself, which is an unusually ambitious response to poor customer service. Working with naval engineer George Conrad Westervelt, Boeing produced the B&W seaplane, later known as Boeing Model 1. Boeing himself flew the first example, nicknamed Bluebill, on 15 June 1916. Exactly 1 month later, he incorporated Pacific Aero Products with capital of $100,000. The name, however, did not last long. In 1917, with the United States entering the First World War and military aviation expanding rapidly, the company became the Boeing Airplane Company. From that small Seattle operation emerged one of the defining enterprises of aviation history. Boeing aircraft would carry mail, passengers, presidents, paratroopers, atomic bombs, and, on certain unfortunate occasions, corporate executives before congressional committees. There is something wonderfully representative about the company beginning beside the waters of the Pacific Northwest with a timber magnate and a wooden seaplane. The materials became more sophisticated, the airplanes became larger, the engineering became almost unimaginably complex. But the essential aviation industry tradition was present right from the beginning. Build something nobody has built before, fly it before common sense intervenes, and worry about obtaining the replacement parts afterward. 16 July, Christendom, the atom, and the moon. Now, the 16th of July may be the most densely consequential date of our entire week. On this date, Christendom conventionally split in two. 891 years later, scientists split the atom with sufficient enthusiasm to illuminate the New Mexico desert. And exactly 24 years after that, 3 men departed Earth atop a rocket designed in large part by engineers collected from the losing side of the war that the atomic bomb had helped to end. If history had employed an editor, this sequence would have been rejected as too excessively tidy. 16 July, 1054, the Great Schism. On Saturday, the 16th of July, 1054, Cardinal Humbert of Silva Candida entered the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople during preparations for the afternoon liturgy. He approached the altar, deposited a document excommunicating Patriarch Michael Cerularius, walked out, and reportedly shook the dust of the city from his feet. As diplomatic gestures go, it ranged somewhere between slamming the door and setting fire to the embassy. Humbert represented Pope Leo IX, who had died 3 months earlier, raising the awkward question of whether the cardinal still really possessed any authority to excommunicate anybody. Cerularius and a synod responded by condemning Humbert and his companions. These mutual denunciations are traditionally treated as the beginning of the Great Schism between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. In reality, Christianity did not divide suddenly during one particularly unpleasant Saturday afternoon. The Greek East and the Latin West had been drifting apart for some centuries. They disputed papal authority, clerical marriage, the type of bread to be used in communion, and the Western addition of the word filioque, or and the Son, to the Nicene Creed. They spoke different languages, followed different customs, and inhabited political worlds that were increasingly alien to one another. Even after 1054, many participants did not realize that an allegedly permanent schism had even occurred. But symbolic dates become symbolic because they compress long, complicated processes into a scene that everyone can remember. And Cardinal Humbert placing an excommunication upon the altar of the Hagia Sophia is an exceptionally memorable scene. The breach widened over the subsequent centuries, particularly after Western Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204. Nothing encourages Christian reconciliation quite like fellow Christians stealing the furnishings from your church. The excommunications of 1054 were finally lifted in 1965. By then, the two halves of Christendom had been formally estranged for more than 900 years, proving that church committees may move slowly, but they possess extraordinary institutional stamina. 16 July 1945, the Trinity test. At 5:29 on the morning of Monday, the 16th of July 1945, scientists detonated the world's first atomic device in the Jornada del Muerto desert of New Mexico. The name means Journey of the Dead Man, which in retrospect seems a little too perfect to have survived the screenwriting process. The device was simply known as the Gadget. It contained a plutonium core surrounded by carefully shaped explosive lenses designed to compress it inward and produce a nuclear chain reaction. The implosion design was so complex and so uncertain that the Manhattan Project scientists considered a full-scale test to be absolutely essential. The Gadget was raised atop a 100-foot steel tower. Bad weather delayed the scheduled detonation, while military and scientific observers waited at shelters miles away, uncertain precisely what was going to happen. There had been joking speculation that the bomb might ignite the atmosphere and destroy the world. Calculations showed this was effectively impossible, which is a reassuring phrase only when the calculation has already proved correct. The flash illuminated the desert floor. The explosion vaporized the tower, fused sand into radioactive green glass, later dubbed trinitite, and produced a yield equivalent to roughly 21,000 tons of TNT. The atomic age had begun. Trinity demonstrated that the plutonium implosion weapon worked. A similar device was dropped on Nagasaki 24 days later after the uranium bomb destroyed much of Hiroshima. The bombs, the Soviet entry into the Pacific War, and Japan's worsening military position combined to produce surrender. The precise balance among those causes remains debated. What cannot be debated is that humanity had crossed a technological Rubicon from which there was no retreat. Until Trinity, extinction by human engineering belonged largely in the realm of speculative fiction. After Trinity, it became government policy, military doctrine, and an item in the national budget. 16 July 1969, Apollo 11 launches for the moon. Exactly 24 years after Trinity, on the morning of Wednesday, the 16th of July 1969, Apollo 11 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins sat atop a Saturn V rocket, 36 stories tall, containing enough fuel and controlled violence to remove 3 men from the Earth. At 9:32 in the morning, its first stage engines produced approximately 7.5 million pounds of thrust. The rocket rose slowly at first, appearing almost reluctant to accept that something so large had been ordered to fly. Then it accelerated toward orbit, carrying humanity's first lunar landing expedition. The connection between Apollo and the Second World War was not merely chronological. The Saturn V development team was led by Dr. Wernher von Braun, who had designed Germany's V-2 ballistic missile. After the war, the United States brought von Braun and other German specialists to America through Operation Paperclip. They arrived as valuable technical assets, while the slave labor, brutality, and deaths associated with V-2 production were treated as so much inconvenient cargo that need not accompany them through customs. Apollo was far larger than von Braun or his German team, though hundreds of thousands of Americans worked across government, universities, and private industry to make the first moon landing possible. But the linkage was unmistakable. The ballistic missile created to bombard European cities had become an ancestor of the rocket that was carrying explorers beyond Earth. 4 days after the launch, Armstrong and Aldrin landed the lunar module Eagle in the Sea of Tranquility, while Collins remained in lunar orbit. The 20th century had taken human beings from the first powered flight to the moon in 66 years. And on 2 successive 16th of July, separated by exactly 24 years, the spoils of history were put to radically different uses. In 1945, scientists demonstrated that civilization could destroy itself. In 1969, engineers demonstrated that it could leave its own planet. The same species had developed both capabilities. The remarkable thing is that we managed to point the second rocket upward. 17 July 1453, the Battle of Castillon. On Tuesday, the 17th of July 1453, the French and English fought the last greatest battle of the 100 Years' War near Castillon in Gascony. The French army had constructed a fortified encampment defended by several hundred cannon under the direction of Jean Bureau, one of the architects of France's increasingly formidable royal artillery. The English commander was John Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, an experienced and famously aggressive soldier who had been fighting the French for so long that restraint had apparently come to seem vaguely unpatriotic. Talbot received reports suggesting that the French were retreating. Instead of waiting for his entire army, he hurried forward and attacked. The supposed retreat turned out to be merely some movement among the camp followers. The French army remained very much present, protected behind earthworks and equipped with enough gunpowder to make the distinction immediately apparent. English troops charged the fortified position and were torn apart by concentrated artillery fire. Reinforcements arrived piecemeal and joined the catastrophe piecemeal. Talbot's horse was reportedly killed by a cannonball, pinning him beneath it, after which a French soldier finished him off. The defeat shattered England's last serious field army in Gascony. Bordeaux surrendered to Charles VII 3 months later, leaving Calais as England's only significant possession in France. There was no grand peace treaty formally concluding the 100 Years' War. After 116 years, everyone simply stopped fighting it. If military entropy is a thing, this was it. But Castillon was more than the end of a long dynastic quarrel. It demonstrated that disciplined infantry, earthworks, and organized field artillery could destroy the mounted aristocratic warrior culture that had dominated medieval battlefields. The English longbow had helped to win at Crécy and at Agincourt. At Castillon, the cannon announced that it had been promoted. 17 July 1945, the Potsdam Conference begins. On Tuesday, the 17th of July 1945, the leaders of the victorious Allied powers assembled at Potsdam outside the ruins of Berlin to decide what was to become of Germany and the world that Germany had attempted to conquer. The participants, at the start at least, were Joseph Stalin, Harry Truman, and Winston Churchill. Truman had been president for only about 3 months. He had inherited Franklin Roosevelt's war, Roosevelt's advisors, and Roosevelt's relationship with Stalin, without inheriting Roosevelt's experience in managing any of those things. Churchill, by contrast, had been directing Britain's war since 1940 and probably expected to remain present until somebody officially switched off the lights of Europe. Instead, Britain held a general election. When the votes were counted during the conference, much to the surprise of most people in the world, Churchill's Conservative Party had been decisively defeated. He went home and was replaced at the negotiating table by Clement Attlee, giving Potsdam the unusual distinction of beginning with one British prime minister and ending with another. The conference addressed occupation zones, reparations, Germany's borders, the movement of millions of people, and the fate of Poland. The Allies agreed upon German demilitarization, denazification, and prosecution of war criminals, but the wartime partnership was already beginning to fracture. The Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe. The Western powers increasingly feared what Stalin intended to do with it. And in the New Mexico desert, one day before the conference opened, the Trinity test had revealed that Truman possessed a weapon unlike anything in human history. The conference was intended to arrange the peace after the Second World War. Instead, it also became one of the first great conferences of the Cold War. Churchill arrived as the man who had warned the world about Hitler. He departed as the leader of the opposition. Truman arrived as an inexperienced replacement. He departed knowing that the United States now possessed the atomic bomb. Stalin, he arrived knowing almost all of that already. 17 July 1955, the opening of Disneyland. On Sunday, the 17th of July 1955, Walt Disney opened Disneyland in Anaheim, California, before a nationwide television audience. Disney had conceived the park after years of taking his daughters to amusement parks and wondering why the attractions were dirty, the employees were indifferent, and the parents appeared to be serving sentences. He wanted to build something cleaner, something more immersive, something more carefully controlled, a place where visitors could walk through idealized versions of America's past, encounter visions of its future, and purchase wildly overpriced commemorative merchandise from both. The result was Disneyland. Opening day was an invitation-only press preview. Approximately 28,000 people arrived, although only about half of them had legitimate invitations. The remainder entered with counterfeit tickets or by less formal methods, establishing immediately that no kingdom is truly magical until it develops a border security problem. The temperature exceeded 100 degrees. Traffic backed up for many miles. Restaurants ran out of food and beverages. Some attractions broke down. Television cables created hazards for guests and presenters. Fresh asphalt softened in the heat, producing the celebrated reports of women's high heels sinking into Main Street. A plumber's strike had forced Disney to choose between completing the drinking fountains and completing the toilets. He chose the toilets, thereby demonstrating a firmer grasp of human necessity than many municipal governments. Disney employees remembered the occasion as Black Sunday. Television viewers, however, saw something different. They saw Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland. They saw a new form of entertainment in which films, architecture, rides, theatrical performance, and retail commerce become one enormous controlled environment. Disneyland opened imperfectly, chaotically, and half-finished. In other words, it opened exactly as Tomorrowland ought to have done. 18 July 1925, Mein Kampf is published. On Saturday, the 18th of July 1925, the first volume of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf was published in Germany. Hitler had begun dictating the book while imprisoned following the failed beer hall putsch of 1923. His attempt to overthrow the Bavarian government had collapsed with almost comic incompetence. The German judicial system responded by giving him a comfortable prison term, allowing him to receive visitors, providing him with publicity, and releasing him after approximately 9 months. It was one of history's more consequential failures to distinguish a ridiculous political extremist from a harmless one. Mein Kampf combined autobiography, political manifesto, racial obsession, and several hundred pages of evidence that fanaticism does not necessarily produce readable prose. The first volume presented many of the ideas that later defined the National Socialist regime. Hitler attacked parliamentary democracy, Marxism, liberalism, and the Treaty of Versailles. He portrayed history as a racial struggle. He demanded territorial expansion into Eastern Europe and described Jews as the central enemy behind Germany's supposed humiliation and decline. The book initially sold modestly at best. After Hitler became chancellor in 1933, sales exploded. It was distributed to newlyweds, soldiers, and public officials, and eventually became one of the most widely owned books in Germany, though ownership and completion are not necessarily the same achievement. Later generations sometimes treated Hitler's crimes as though they emerged without warning after he obtained power, but the warning had been published, bound, and placed on sale 8 years earlier. Mein Kampf did not contain a detailed operational blueprint for every single later atrocity. It did, however, contain the worldview that made those atrocities possible. The future dictator had taken the unusual precaution of explaining himself. The failure was not that nobody could have known. The failure was that enough people either believed him, excused him, or assumed somebody else would prevent him from acting upon it. 18 July 1968, the founding of Intel. On Thursday, the 18th of July 1968, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore incorporated a new semiconductor company in California. Both men had been leading figures at Fairchild Semiconductor. Noyce had developed the integrated circuit. Moore had already observed that the number of components placed upon an integrated circuit was increasing at a remarkably predictable rate, an observation later identified as Moore's law and used to explain why every electronic device becomes obsolete shortly after its owner learns how to operate it. The new company was initially called NM Electronics. Noyce and Moore considered naming it Moore Noyce, but they wisely rejected that name since it sounded like more noise, especially since it's a company producing electronic components. They settled upon Intel, which was short for Integrated Electronics. The company initially concentrated on semiconductor memory. In 1971, Intel introduced the 4004, the first commercially available microprocessor sold as an individual component. The processing functions that previously required multiple circuits could now be concentrated upon a single programmable chip. That development helped make possible the personal computer revolution and eventually placed Intel processors inside millions of office machines, home computers, and beige plastic boxes whose principal function was displaying an hourglass. The founding of Intel belongs to a strange category of historical event. No city fell, no treaty was signed. Nobody standing in Mountain View that day heard a trumpet blast announcing that the modern digital world had begun. 2 engineers filed the paperwork for a company intended to manufacture very small pieces of silicon. But revolutions do not always arrive carrying flags and rifles. Sometimes they arrive so microscopically that the human eye cannot see them. Then they spend the next half century arranging nearly every detail of human life. 18 July 1976, Nadia scores a perfect 10. On Sunday, the 18th of July 1976, at the Montreal Olympics, 14-year-old Romanian gymnast Nadia Comaneci performed her compulsory routine on the uneven bars. When she finished, the judges awarded her a score of 10. It was the first perfect 10 in Olympic gymnastics history. There was only one problem. The scoreboard couldn't display it. The equipment manufacturer had been told that a perfect score was impossible, and the board contained room for only 3 digits. It therefore, on the day, displayed 1.00. For a brief moment, the greatest routine yet ever scored in Olympic competition appeared to have received the sort of mark generally reserved for someone who falls off the apparatus, collides with a judge, and then sets fire to the mat. The audience understood what had happened when the announcer confirmed the 10. Comaneci remained almost unnaturally composed. Her routine had lasted less than 20 seconds. Her reputation would last for the rest of her life. She earned 6 more perfect 10s during those Montreal Games and won 3 gold medals, 1 silver, and 1 bronze. The performance also demonstrated the hazards of designing technology around the assumption that human perfection will remain safely theoretical. Gymnastics scoring later abandoned the 10-point ceiling. Modern routines receive separate scores for difficulty and for execution, allowing the numbers to rise beyond 10 while becoming nearly incomprehensible to everyone except the judges and several parents in Romania. But Comaneci's achievement remains instantly understandable. There was a scale from 0 to 10. She reached the top of the scale. The judges were prepared. The audience was prepared. Nadia Comaneci herself was prepared. Only the scoreboard lacked sufficient imagination. 19 July 1553, Mary Tudor is proclaimed queen. On Wednesday, the 19th of July 1553, Mary Tudor was proclaimed Queen of England, bringing the disputed reign of Lady Jane Grey to an end after a mere 9 days. The succession crisis had begun with the death of Mary's half-brother, Edward VI. Edward was 15, fervently Protestant, and about to die without having produced an heir. Under the normal succession established by their father, Henry VIII, the crown would pass first to Mary, who was a committed Catholic, and then on to her sister Elizabeth. Edward and his advisors found this religiously inconvenient. They therefore attempted to bypass both of the sisters and leave the throne to their Protestant cousin, Lady Jane. Jane was intelligent, well-educated, and approximately 16 years old. She was also married to the son of John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, the most powerful man in Edward's government. This was either a remarkable constitutional coincidence or the sort of succession arrangement that becomes less convincing each time it is explained. Jane was proclaimed queen on 10 July. Northumberland expected Mary to be captured before she could organize any sort of resistance. Instead, Mary escaped to East Anglia, gathered supporters, and declared herself to be the lawful queen. The country rallied around her. The fleet sent against her defected. Members of the Privy Council, demonstrating the timeless statesman-like principle of recognizing the winning side, promptly abandoned Jane and proclaimed Mary on the 19th of July. Northumberland was executed. Jane was imprisoned. Mary initially showed some reluctance to execute her young cousin, but another Protestant rebellion carried out in Jane's name made her continued existence politically untenable. So Jane was beheaded in 1554. Mary became England's first crowned queen regnant, not the wife of a king, but a sovereign ruling in her own right. Her accession established that an English woman could inherit and exercise royal authority. It was a constitutional breakthrough achieved through a family dispute in which nearly every participant eventually lost his head. 19 July 1870, France declares war on Prussia. On Tuesday, the 19th of July, 1870, the French Empire declared war on Prussia. Napoleon III's government believed that a successful war would restore French prestige, strengthen the emperor's increasingly shaky regime, and prevent Prussia from dominating Germany. It accomplished exactly one of those objectives. The Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck wanted the southern German states to unite with Prussia, and he understood that nothing encourages German unity quite like being attacked by France. The immediate dispute concerned a possible Hohenzollern candidate for the vacant Spanish throne. The candidacy was withdrawn, but the French government demanded additional guarantees from King Wilhelm of Prussia. Wilhelm politely refused. He sent Bismarck an account of the encounter from the spa town of Ems. Bismarck shortened and edited the telegram so that it appeared the king had insulted the French ambassador and the ambassador had harassed the king. The published dispatch offended both countries exactly as intended, and Paris demanded war. Prussia accepted with the grim reluctance of a man whose dinner reservation has been confirmed. The French expected to invade Germany. Instead, German mobilization proved faster, larger, and much better organized. Within weeks, the French armies were surrounded. Napoleon III was captured at Sedan. His empire collapsed. Paris was besieged. And German princes proclaimed Wilhelm Emperor of a united Germany in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. France lost Alsace and part of Lorraine and acquired a grievance that would remain politically radioactive for some decades. Bismarck did not create every cause of the Franco-Prussian War. French insecurity, German nationalism, and mutual hostility had prepared the powder, but he understood exactly where to place the match. The French government entered the war seeking prestige. 6 weeks later, its emperor was a prisoner, and its empire no longer existed. It remains one of history's finest demonstrations that the phrase short victorious war should immediately cause everyone in the cabinet room to hide the stationery. 19 July 1903, a chimney sweep wins the Tour de France. On Sunday, the 19th of July 1903, Maurice Garand won the inaugural edition of the Tour de France. The race had not been created by a sporting federation or by a national government, but by the newspaper L'Auto, which needed a publicity stunt large enough to destroy one of its rival publications. Editor Henri Desgrands approved a race around France consisting of 6 stages and approximately 2,428 kilometers. Only 60 riders started the race. 21 of them completed every stage. The stages bore little resemblance to modern professional cycling. The final run from Nantes toward Paris covered approximately 471 kilometers. Riders competed on heavy bicycles with limited gearing, traveled across unpaved or badly surfaced roads, and frequently rode through the night. Mechanical failures had to be repaired under restrictive rules because apparently cycling 1,500 miles was not considered sufficiently character building unless accompanied by roadside metalwork. Garand had worked as a chimney sweep before becoming a cyclist. He won the opening stage, retained the overall lead throughout the race, and then he won the final stage as well. His final margin was 2 hours, 59 minutes, 31 seconds. Modern tours are often decided by a second or two. The first was decided by enough time for the runner-up to take a bath, eat dinner, and reconsider his career choices. Garand and the surviving riders proceeded to the Parc des Princes velodrome, where thousands of spectators greeted them. The race dramatically increased L'Auto's circulation and returned the following year. The 1904 tour produced so much cheating, sabotage, and partisan violence that Garand and several leading finishers were eventually disqualified. Competitors took trains, accepted rides in automobiles, scattered nails, and attacked one another's supporters. In other words, professional cycling required only 1 year to establish most of its enduring traditions. But on 19 July 1903, the experiment had worked. The chimney sweep reached Paris first. The newspaper found its audience, and France discovered that the only thing more entertaining than watching men suffer was arranging for them to suffer in a complete circuit of the country. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our leisurely stroll through human history during the week of 13 July through 19 July. 7 dates, 21 events. A medieval war ends beside an artillery trench. A world war gives way to a cold one across a conference table. A disastrous theme park preview becomes an American institution. A failed revolutionary publishes his intentions. 2 engineers incorporate the future. A 14-year-old girl achieves a score the machine has been assured cannot exist. A teenage queen loses a crown. An emperor declares a war that destroys his empire. And a former chimney sweep bicycles around France because a newspaper needs subscribers. And by the time I'm speaking these words, drunken Spaniards will be marauding through the New York City metro area, celebrating their 1-0 vanquishing of the Argentines. Millions of people will remember the goals, the saves, the disputed decisions, and the flopping, and the flopping, and the flopping. Almost nobody will be thinking about the 13 invited teams who first crossed the oceans to begin the first tournament in Uruguay 96 years ago. But that is exactly what anniversaries are for. They remind us that every enormous institution began as an experiment. Every established order was once provisional, and every event that now appears inevitable was once merely something happening to people who could not see the next paragraph. History doesn't know which moments will become symbols. It doesn't know which companies will transform the world, which battles will end in age, or which teenager will exceed the capacity of the scoreboard. History, in all of its beautiful obstinance, simply keeps occurring. And then it leaves the rest of us to assign the dates, erect the monuments, and complain that the referee was bribed. And with that, I crisply pass the pelota over to my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
If God had wanted man to play soccer, he wouldn't have given us arms. Mike Ditka. I love that. Hi, I'm Sasquatch.
I'm Cap.
Nice. Good
How
evening,
you all
ladies
doing?
and gentlemen. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Tonight, we're going to sit and wax philosophical about everything that strikes our fancy because we didn't actually put together a plan for this. I watched Sheep Detective. Does that
Tell
help?
me about Sheep Detective.
All right. So, if it was a bunch of humans, it would be a classic Miss Marple tale. You would fall right in there with Murder, She Wrote and the rest of the classic detective sagas that you've read. However, these are animated sheep.
Yeah, I was going to ask what kind of if it's animated or not. So I guess I have the answer to that.
Okay, so
Or I guess if the name is Sheep Detective, it kind of has to be animated, doesn't it?
well, they're not entirely CGI abominations, but they're not very far from that uncanny valley either. But I kind of get it, right?
Yeah.
There are a few funny points in it. They've got this constable, who's like the worst officer in history. And this is like his first week as lead constable, and he's got his newly hired helper person over here, and poof, there's a murder. He's supposed to handle all of this, and there hasn't been a murder in this joint in like 15, 20 years since before the last chief or whatever was there. So it's a hokey little fun sort of. I wouldn't expect no deep philosophical life-changing imagery coming from this, but if you like talking sheep, why not?
Oh, it's a movie. I didn't realize it was a movie. I thought it was a show. I'm catching up on the. Oh, look at all the people that are in it.
Yeah, no, it is star-studded, bro. There are all kinds of folks in it.
Emma Thompson, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Bryan Cranston, Patrick Stewart. God damn. Yeah,
Keep going.
it's well, okay. Hugh Jackman.
Right.
Person I haven't heard of. Person I haven't heard of. Person I haven't heard. Yeah, that's all the people I've heard of.
Right. No, I was waiting for
Yeah.
Hugh Jackman. That was the one I was expecting to be at the top of the list.
Oh, okay. So some of the people are actual people, and the animals are CGI abominations. I gotcha.
Right. Well, see, that's the thing though, is like the ones that are most needed for the story are CGI abominations. The rest of them are just CGI sheep for the most part. They do that have this one bit that is so woke it made me like giggle maniacally. There's this point where something bad happens on the farm, and all the sheep get together and decide they're just going to forget it. And they do a countdown, and everyone forgets that happens, except for this one sheep who hasn't figured out how to do that.
You know what? Since we're on the subject of CGI abominations, and I apologize if this is a subject swerve, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Hollywood freaking out. I know Hollywood freaks out about everything, but there's a big Hollywood freak out going on about AI currently, and how everybody in Hollywood is going to lose their jobs when everything becomes AI. And I mean, you know how the song and dance goes, but
Right.
to which my natural counterpoint is kind of, is there really that much difference between AI and the CGI that has been dominating visual effects in film and television for over the last 30 years? Because let's not forget, everybody said all the same shit when CGI was first coming into wide usage. It's going to destroy the industry. Everybody's going to lose their job. And what was the actual result? The actual result was the opposite of the doomsday scenario that everybody predicted. The actual result is that, look at the freaking credits on any film that comes out in current year, and 3/4 of the names are goddamn computer animators. So I would then submit that rather than wreck all the jobs in Hollywood, CGI actually created most of the jobs in Hollywood. And that tends to be the thing that actually happens when these doomsday scenarios don't ever materialize. What say you?
It altered the focus of the jobs in Hollywood. Once upon a time, There were key grips, advanced grips, alternate grips. There were lighting grips. There were all kinds of different people that did all kinds of stuff. With the advent of CGI, almost all of that turned into a specialty thing, right?
And
You
a lot
don't.
of tradesmen too, carpenters, plasterers, so forth.
Well, the grips thing is specifically movie based, specifically
Right.
lighting,
Yeah.
sound, all that stuff. You might have some of the other stuff in other venues, but movies, you need a lot of grips. And
Key grip,
the
dolly
use-
grip, best boy grip. Yep.
exactly. The use of CGI for B-roll footage has almost completely eliminated the grip as low, what is it called? Low skill entry level thing. It's no longer an entry level thing at all. You can't just run down to the freaking lot and be like, "Hey, I'll help." And
Just push
help on a
this
movie.
dolly down the track, and I'll tell you when to stop.
Right. It's not like that anymore. Now all of that stuff is so super freaking regulated that it's almost impossible to get it in any of those places. And CGI is largely responsible for that.
Absolutely. And as we know, CGI in general has not had a necessarily positive effect on the art of filmmaking.
It hasn't, and I find it a little depressing that some of the special effects out of, I don't know, 2010 are competitive with special effects occurring this year, right? I would
go
hard
back even farther than I would go back all the way to the 50s and 60s. Some of the war movies, specifically the naval combat movies, some of the miniature work in those movies is better than CGI today. Go ahead.
You're specifically talking practical effects. I was kind of
Yep.
bypassing the entire concept of practical effects because, I mean, it's not even really a competition at that point. Any of your basic early Star Wars productions would show you that. But Battlestar Galactica, bro, would show you that practical effects win in almost every situation where you could utilize CGI. It just might be way more expensive to pull it off. And one of the things that CGI eliminated was the practical effects of B-roll type stuff. Like imagine if filming Avengers, they had to shut down parts of Fifth Avenue in order to get that shot, right? But instead of that, they just went with a polygonal green screen and got people to jump up on green screen cars and stuff like that. And it was way cheaper to do it that way with a little bit of CGI, and you get some really epic shots, and they were very effective. But at the same time, it was an entirely different protocol for filming.
Buck Rogers in the 25th century, baby. Gil Gerard for the win.
You get a participation trophy, sir. Welcome in.
Yeah, I loved that damn show when I was a kid, man. That show in Battlestar Galactica. That's where it was at.
I never got off on Buck Rogers, bro. It never did nothing for now. Battlestar Galactica, for whatever reason, when I was a very young child, my mom was rewatching all of the Battlestar Galactica things, and it was at the same time when V was airing. So this is like 84, 85, something like that. I was just old enough to realize what a TV was. And my very first introduction into deep sci-fi was a very confusing mixture of Battlestar Galactica and V.
Yeah. Aaron Gray. Aaron Gray made me feel feelings I didn't yet understand. And yet, Buck Rogers would have been so much better.
I know who you're talking about.
Without fucking Tweaky. Even when I was 5 years old, I was like, take Tweaky and shove him up your fucking ass. I don't need to see that little kid shit. Give me the Hawk. The Hawk is a fucking badass.
Nice.
And Aaron Gray is a handsome woman. Yeah, I even though I was one of the little kids they were targeting, I always hated when they would try to put little kid shit into these shows. I don't want to see little kid shit. Just give me just because I'm a little kid doesn't mean I want to see little kid shit. It shouldn't be difficult to understand. I want to watch the same shit that the adults want to watch. Like, come on, man, work with me here. So many shows were ruined by trying to put little kid shit in them all the time when there was no good reason to do it. And all it did was alienate people, including the little kids.
I did watch almost the entire run of the original Superman series. My uncle was an old film addict, and he had all kinds of crazy stuff. He had like old boxing matches, all the old cartoons, the old super racist uber Disney cartoons that you can't find anymore. He had all that stuff. He had hair raising tales from Looney Tunes and all kinds of other stuff. This was done on an old reel-to-reel projector, like in a projection room that he had built specifically for its use.
You used to have to work for it.
Right. Anytime I went and visited, that was the very first thing he would do is like he'd come out of his ham radio room, walk across the hall and unlock the viewing room and open the door. And he'd tell me, he's like, just come let me know when the movie's over. And I said, okay. And these things had been put together so they were like 4 hours long, dude. It was like all of the old World War II mini reels that were in all the little news segments and stuff. It wasn't the news segments, it was just the little cartoons in between with what was that one character's name? Private
it's a mixtape, just like we used to do with cassettes.
Yeah. But the thing is because the way he got these is he worked at a movie theater, and as they were taken out of rotation, he added them to his own collection. And so here he is, 76 years old, right? And he's got this one nephew that just can't get enough of the damn things. Like, I watched everything in his collection maybe 10 times. Jack Nicholson.
The George Reeves Superman, give me that all day long. I could have. I mean, how I'm watching that when it's at least 30 years after it was made, when I was the age to be watching it on reruns, and who gives a shit? I didn't care it was from the 50s. It was badass. George Reeves Superman was so much cooler than Adam West Batman, not even a contest. I can't speak for anybody else, but Batman always kind of annoyed me because it was just a little bit too over the top, campy and comedic, and refused to take itself seriously. And I say that knowing that some of the performances on the show were really quite outstanding. Burgess Meredith, Cesar Romero in particular. But the overall tone of the show and, you know, the comic book speech bubbles during the fight scenes, I never really could get very into that. I know what they were going for. I just wasn't into it. The car was kind of cool, but George Reeves Superman, hell yes.
I got to watch the George Reeves Superman bit years later. I had like 2 part-time jobs, and I'd worked it out to basically 4 8-hour shifts a week, and had the 2 jobs on the same days, about 30 minutes in between them. And it just by coincidence, it turned into an hour in between them just by product of the scheduling, the way it worked. So I ended up having an hour between them. So I would go home to my apartment, sit down cross-legged at like freaking midnight and watch, I don't remember, I think it was like TNT Classic Movies or something. They would air something like that, and for like 6 months that's what they were airing, was the old George Reeves Superman episodes. And my girlfriends and my other friends thought I was nuts because they might be sitting around having a party, and I'd walk in and clear the whole room out, turn on an old black and white Superman series and sit there and eat my
That's what I'm talking about. You better put on your tinfoil hat because John's got a conspiracy theory for you here.
Let's see what we got. Oh bother. Kate sees it. What say you on whether Superman was off by the mob? Hey, I don't got no hate for that theory because homie was a severe alcoholic. He had some serious gambling issues and was not persona non grata in several of the gambling palaces on both the East Coast and in Vegas. And there was barely anything in Vegas at the time, but he was already blackballed out of there. So that tells you anything.
I remember one time I watched the movie where Ben Affleck plays George Reeves. I don't even remember the title of it, and I don't remember anything about the movie itself. I just remember that I watched it one time, and it must not have made a very big impression because, like I said, I don't remember a single damn thing about it. And I remember that was when Affleck was kind of at the nadir of his career and having to do more art house type, smaller budget movies since he did have quite a long nadir there, as I recall, after the whole Bennifer thing ended, and between then and when he got the Batman gig,
well,
there was kind of a long walk in the desert.
Well, I don't know though, because he, as I understand it, he was involved in some directing activities and did tons of cameos throughout that whole period. But at the same time, he wasn't actively acting; like he wasn't taking full gigs. But if
and he didn't have the status that he had once had.
Well, who's the other guy that's always in everything? It's Ben Affleck and
Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. If Matt Damon's doing a movie, Ben Affleck seems to be perfectly willing to throw on a hood and run around in the background just to be silly. So
Matt Damon, who's currently playing the lead in the #1 movie in the world.
Really?
Odyssey.
Oh, not really. Gotcha.
Yeah, it outperformed all the projections for opening weekend. I heard it pulled in 125, something like that.
And so, I guess it has to, though. Think about this. A significant portion of those people will be content creators specifically watching it to create content to badmouth it. So you can expect either a significant drop off after the first week, the first 3 nights, to be honest. And if that might be a good film.
It will be interesting to see how big the drop off is in the second weekend. And I was also interested to hear that the Elliot Page character gets killed within the first 5 minutes.
Oh, well, that might even be a redeeming quality.
So, and doesn't that just confirm what a bit of stunt casting that was? Because let's face it, let's call things what they are. People don't want to call things what they are, but let's call things what they are. If you want your movie to win awards, to be eligible for any of the big awards, you have to abide by the Academy's current woke diversity code that they put in place a few years ago, which means you have to have a certain number of non-white speaking roles. They have to have a certain amount of screen time and a certain amount of lines you have to give to them, and you have to have certain numbers of sexually non-normative characters. They have to have certain numbers of lines, and it's a whole owner's manual of shit you have to do.
But here, you have to keep in mind, and you remember what I said about the Wheel of Time, that it was coming from a gynocentric woke source, and so no matter how hard they woke it, the worst they could do is make it silly, and that's what they did, was make it silly. But it was just as woke as the source material. This has a similar sort of ring to it in the fact that it's not actually a reimagining of the Odyssey. It is a recreation of an already reimagined Odyssey, right?
Yes.
The source material itself was a political writ specifically to I don't know, generate conversation in the first place. And so this happening, realizing that, I kind of look at it like maybe like Black Panther.
Yeah, it's a reimagining of an adaptation, because the thing that's actually being adapted is basically a feminist bastardization of the Odyssey that was written about a dozen years ago by some lesbian battle axe college professor, and probably sounds about like you would expect.
I'm actually more concerned with whether or not they stick to the source material itself, or whether they've wokeified their own wokeified source material. What do you reckon?
I think there's zero chance that anybody would actually try to adapt Homer, because you can't adapt Homer, because adapting Homer would require breaking a lot of the strictures that currently exist in the woke Hollywood era. You can't have heroic male characters who are just heroic and admirable, praiseworthy people. You have, if you're going to have, if you're going to have a male protagonist, especially a white male protagonist, he has to be emotionally damaged. He has to go on a journey with his feelings. He has to learn everything that he learns from female characters. And you know the blueprint. It's the way the female characters have to be the actual protagonists, the ones with all the wisdom and all the admirable qualities. And to the extent that the male character has an arc, it's an arc that he goes through because he has had his character improved by his interactions with the female lesbian characters.
But wouldn't all of that have already taken place in the feminization of the Odyssey that it's based on?
Yes.
Or would there be a second coat of woke put on this polished turd?
I think it's probably a fairly direct adaptation of the lesbian feminist bastardization that is the actual source material, because as we know, Homer is not the actual source material, because that's another thing that you can't do in woke Hollywood, is you can't uncritically adapt great works from the distant past. You have to reimagine them for the modern audience.
Sure. So as a direct comparison, or rather maybe not a direct comparison, but as a better example, what Odyssey adaptation would you point at as being the best?
That's a good question. Which
And can we just go ahead and take Oh Brother Where Art Thou out of the pile, because that's my pick right out the gate. So we're just going to remove that. We're going to put a pin in that over here and accept it as the best and move on with like the rest of them. I like the old stop motion animation ones, and there was one done.
Oh yeah, that's a good call. That's a good call.
At the end of, like, I think it was a 79, maybe 80. It had like Charlton Heston or one of his clones running around as Odysseus, and it was always real cheesy and campy to me, like in the old Jason and the Argonauts school of stop motion. But the remastered versions of it are absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I've seen footage from those, and I agree. Ulysses 1954, Kirk Douglas, top of my
Right, no,
list.
that's the one. That's how it wasn't Charlton Heston. It was Kirk Douglas. You're absolutely right. That's the one. Yeah. So wow, that's older than I thought it was. But the remastered version of it, I think you can find it on Tubi, is absolute. It's the Odyssey. What I want to do is have you ever seen Alpha?
I don't believe so.
It's a pre-Stone Age, or rather a Stone Age tale about how dogs became part of human culture, right? And it's about this kid who falls off a cliff. He gets attacked by stuff. He gets injured, and a wolf gets injured near him, and they sort of defend each other and take care of each other for a little while. And it turns out the wolf's pregnant. And when he gets back to his tribe, they all basically take a puppy and raise it, and dogs exist after that. All right. So it's a very eye-open kind of jaunt into a possible history where this might have happened, right, at some point. And it's possible that some part of our dogs today is directly lineaged from a single unification between a dog, a wolf, and a single man. Highly unlikely. I want an approach like that done with Odysseus, with the entire Iliad, Odyssey, the whole thing, and have it set in the Atlantic basin rather than the Mediterranean, because some of the distances that they talk about traveling is absolutely absurd for the Mediterranean.
Oh God, I know. And God, I wish you had watched House of the Dragon, because we need to talk about some of the teleportation problems that are manifesting in that show that are way too reminiscent of late period Game of Thrones, when all of a sudden as soon as season 6 starts, it's like people are just beaming up and down from the goddamn Starship Enterprise, and Westeros, stops being an actual continent where it takes time to get places, and you can just be wherever you need to be in one camera cut, and who cares?
Because we do have dragons, but that still doesn't explain the 18 hours of flight it would take, because it takes 9 days at fast mark, 9 days to get from Casterly Rock to the Reach.
Or Battle of the Bastards. The Knights of the Vale show up at Winterfell in less than 24 hours. Come on, man.
Right.
You've stopped giving any actual fucks when you're doing that to the audience. And the people running the show at the time, they even said, we have stopped giving any fucks. We are going for the big dramatic exploitative action beats that we want to go for, and it's such a departure after the first 5 seasons of the show, where they tried so assiduously to keep the thing grounded in the geographical reality of the world that they are supposed to be inhabiting. And that's one of the things that made the show awesome. And it's the absolute moment that they run out of written material, that goes completely out the window. And everybody can just be wherever they need to be, whenever they need to be there. Even if it should be a month-long trip, we've stopped caring about that. It is such a slap in the face to the audience, and I still regret it so much. And
so since we haven't done this, and we really need to do this. Where did Game of Thrones, the original series, where did the Game of Thrones drop off? Where was the plummet?
When you watch it back in retrospect, I mean, there are little hints of it latter half of season 5, I would say, the Jaime and Dorne subplot specifically, but it goes absolutely off a cliff in terms of teleportation and suspension of disbelief right exactly at the start of season 6. And it gets progressively worse and worse and worse as you get into season 7 and season 8. And by the time you get to the end of the series, it's basically a parody of itself. It might as well be Saturday Night Live. None of the things that made the show good are still in existence. And like it almost gets to a point where every single scene is impossible to take seriously. Because of some stone in the shoe type of thing that you just can't unsee or ignore.
All right, perfect example. There's the scene where Daenerys has already crossed the narrow sea. She's got her 10,000 raging Dothraki. She's got her army, her 5 legions, 10 legions of Unsullied. She essentially has an insurmountable slave force that will lay their lives down. They encountered the their names, Rickon and Randall Tarly in the Reach. They utterly just annihilate their supply train, their army, and everything else as she demands that they bend the knee. It should be one of the greatest scenes in the entire freaking series, is an actual execution by Dragonfire. And something's a little bit off in the perspective in the scene. And in one scene, the dragon's like standing under a tree, and in the next scene, the dragon's standing on a rock next to the tree and is 10 times bigger than the tree and breathes fire. And then right back to the next scene where she steps up on his back like it's a freaking step stool job. And I'm like, God damn it. My wife was like, "Oh, that was great. Look at him burn." And I was like, it broke.
It's so much easier to see the cliff that the show went off when you're watching it back with the benefit of, I guess, nearly a decade of hindsight now. Because when you're watching it in real time, week to week, you want it to be good because, it's been good. You're invested in the show, and you're willing to give it the benefit of the doubt that you probably shouldn't be willing to give it. Like, why did Arya Stark get stabbed half a dozen times in the gut and then jump into a shit water filled canal and no infections? She's perfectly fine. Couple days later, she can do parkour all the way down the streets of Bravos and get into a sword fight.
That was another one. Oh my god.
Oh my god, dude. Dude.
All right, so that fight between her and the waif, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he's basically getting her ass creamed from the top of Bravos all the way to the seashore, the whole way until she finally gets her hands back on Needle. Now, I kind of understand the point of all of this is to test her commitment to life to determine how well she can serve death, right? I've read the book the thing of it. It was different. There was a lot more involved in the big book depiction of that whole sequence. Putting out the light in the wine cellar, that last bit, fucking genius. But the total like, what's the name of that movie? Die Hard. The Die Hard ass whipping that girl takes through that city is just completely uncalled for. There's no way she's standing by the time she gets in. She jumps off of like a 5-foot aqueduct into a big pile of freaking fruits. Dude, like
tumble.
Oh, 30 yards down a freaking flight of stairs, hits the bottom and comes up sprinting like Usain Bolt, bro. It's crazy.
And you were stabbed in the gut half a dozen times less than 48 hours ago. And it's parkour, tumble, parkour, gymnastics, sword fight.
Bleeding all over the place currently.
Yeah. And not to mention the fact that if you get stabbed in the gut in medieval times, you're probably almost certainly dead anyway, even if you don't jump into a shitwater-filled canal in the middle of a filthy-ass medieval city. But they just pile one thing on top of the other until you can't take the show seriously anymore. And it's
my favorite part of the later portions was the Clegane Arya arc in combination with the Podrick Brianna of Tarth arc and the Jaime Lannister arc that was built all together, where they end up at the Battle of Winterfell, and Brienne of Tarth, Gregor Clegane, not Gregor, but the Hound, and the big giant, the half giant guy from the north are all sitting around talking. And of course, he's super hard for Brienne of Tarth, right? Like he really wants some of her because he knows she's got giant blood. He wants a big boy, right? So he's over there flattering her. Yeah, she's seen the big woman. Yeah, he's flattering her left, right. It's like, well, you're a knight. She's like, I can't be a knight. And he goes, why not? Because I'm a woman. Why does that matter? And then Jaime Lannister stands up and says, you don't need a king to make a knight. It's true. Any knight. And he draws his sword out, puts her on her knees, gives her the full service. And here's the thing. That moment is just as impressive as it should be. No one will ever know this happened. They're all going to walk out the door in the morning and they're going to go die. As soon as the sun goes down, they are all screwed, right? Yep. So the idea that this is going to change anything is absurd. And yet at the same time, there is a maester in the castle and he might live. So it is possible her name gets put in the book as the first female knight. And also, here's a couple other things, because Podrick was there during one of the ass whoopings, and the different people she's bested in combat always had a witness. True. Right? So all of her deeds should eventually land over there on Tarly fella, the maester. Think about it, bro.
One of my favorites is the episode where we are reintroduced to the Hound after we thought he was dead for a whole season, and the guy, Brother Ray, I think is his name. He says, "It must have taken some man to defeat you," and the Hound goes, "It was a woman."
Yeah, it was a woman, and then later a little girl. The only things that ever beat the Hound in actual combat.
And the thing you mentioned is actually one of my favorite things about this universe, is the democratization of knighthood. That any knight can make another knight, and it doesn't have to be done by an authority figure. Although obviously that would have that would have less than favorable ramifications that aren't really discussed anywhere in the universe, because obviously the net result would be that some knights would just sell knighthoods for a certain price,
Yeah,
because we know that would happen.
There's actually a bit about that, and it might be the Duncan Egg series, or
Is there?
it could be anywhere. I don't know exactly where it's at, but it talks about a, I think he's referred to as a knightly lord. He was a knight who was like the footman of some particularly powerful lord, like, I don't know, Tywin Lannister of Casterly Rock, and was granted a lordship as bequeathed by Casterly Rock, right? And so
Yeah.
he's still a knight of the realm, but he's also a lord over his own lands. And when anytime he came up short for taxes or whatever, he'd just knight a dozen people for a few grand. Now, he did have a rule. All of these knights had to stay in court. They could not go out roaming the countryside making more knights. And if they found out anybody was, he was a knight. So he could go straighten that out fairly succinctly.
So that would be the equivalent in the British system of something like a baronet, which is basically a hereditary knighthood, where you have.
Well, see, that's one thing. Yeah, in the world of Westeros, I don't believe knighthoods are hereditary. Lordships are.
No, lordships are.
Right. So the fact that a knight was capable of attaining a lordship, typically knights aren't. They that's kind of where they end up shooting their wad, is by being a knight.
Yeah.
Becoming a lord after the fact is what the hell did he do?
And there's no station you can be born into that makes you automatically entitled to be a knight. You still have to have it conferred upon you by somebody else who already has been so dubbed. And yet, that's one of the. I don't know if it's a problem, but it's just kind of weird, because in the last episode of House of the Dragon, the 3 dragon seeds, Ulf and Hugh and Adam, they make a big deal of the 3 of them being knighted in the Red Keep by the Queen, and being dubbed with the sword by the king consort, and they treat knighthood as something that can only be conferred upon them by the Queen. But as we know, since we've been in this universe for longer than 5 minutes, that's not the way it is. They can be knighted by any knight they see passing them on the street, if the knight feels so inclined.
But
it just kind of struck me funny.
This is a period before the quote unquote modern period of Westeros. Once upon a time, especially either during and immediately after the Dance of Dragons, knighthoods were conveyed either by specific writ of the king or queen, as the case may be, and could only be done by descendants of Valyrians or some crap like that. There during the Dance of the Dragons, all of the knighthood rules kind of got tossed out, and who could be a knight and who couldn't be a knight was sort of attached to whichever throne that they were particularly behind. The Blackfire Rebellion and all of that.
Oh yeah,
it screwed up knighthoods for 800 years. I don't know, 400 years or something like that. 50 years, I can't remember. It's 90 years before. No, it's way longer than that. Before,
no, it's about 150 years.
Right. So it screws up knighthoods for like 100 years, and they start getting like back to the salt of the earth kind of thing again. Oh wait, it's already that time. Shit, my bad.
It's already that time. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, ever so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius tonight. We sure appreciate you being with us, as we always do. Hope you enjoyed the monologue. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. Have a great tomorrow and a fantastic day after that, and a lovely, edifying rest of your week. We will see you next week, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, Sunday night, as we always do. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.
Actual footage of the monologues.